Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Parent Essence for this quarter. We're having a special guest with us, who is also one of us, Dr. Ifeolu Akintunde, who is going to be speaking to us on parenting lessons. We still have time to invite others to join the Zoom meeting, to be part of the meeting, and also to join on YouTube Live. The YouTube Live is Team Software Praising Child. So I will just be introducing Dr. Ifeolu Akintunde very briefly. So Dr. Ifeolu Akintunde is a friend, is a member of the house, is a member of the Link family. He's also a lawyer and is a consultant overseeing IOC consults, IOA consults. Is it IOA or IOA consults? Yeah.
Full name.
Yes, IOA consults. And we're glad to have him with us. I'm sure he has lots of insights to share with us today. So without much ado, I'll just be handing over to him to start off speaking to us. Thank you, Dr. Ifeolu. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the excellent introduction as well. It's really a pleasure to be speaking to you all. The problem with speaking in a group like this is, one, you don't know who's listening, you don't know how much they know about you and how much. And so it's generally a good idea to speak like we don't know anything. The other thing is that I checked, and this thing is going to last an hour. So I don't want my voice to be droning on at you for an hour. Personally, if someone is just speaking for an hour nonstop, I make you a confession. My head tends to nod. So I'm very happy for this to be as interactive as possible, which means that if at any time you want to ask a question, please feel free to. But if you don't want, because I won't be speaking for an hour, there will be time to ask questions afterwards. And that's very important because, like I said, you never can tell everything that somebody wants to hear. Something that you want to hear that I haven't said, save it either for a question during that time or towards the end. Okay. And, I think it's probably a good idea to introduce myself a bit more, because that will kind of give you an idea. Because if we're talking about parenting, you need to know the person who's doing the parenting or who has been parented or whatever. And that knowing a bit about me would help you to understand what parenting means to me, what it's like. So I was born in Nigeria, of course, in Ibadan. And for all those who are born in UCH, heads up to you all because I'm one of you. My mom was actually a midwife in UCH at the time I was born. It was also during the Civil War, and my dad was away. And my mom used to tell me, she used to say that my dad went around shouting, "It's a boy, it's a boy, it's a boy." So from the very beginning, I sensed that my parents were really very proud of me. There were three of us. I have an elder sister and a younger brother. And it is said, and I don't believe this, I must tell you, it is said that when I was born, that my sister, when they said she should go to school, and she was about nearly 3 years older than me, so she should have started nursery then. When they said she should go to school, she said she didn't want to go to school because she wanted to look after her brother. Whenever we quarrel and they remind me of that, I always say that she was just lazy. That's why. But no, she's a really loving sister. And I've also got a very loving younger brother as well. Like I said, it was during the Civil War. And the first thing that my parents noticed was that me being the second, they had someone to compare me with. And they realized that my vision wasn't as good as my sister's vision. So what to do? My mom working in UCH knew an ophthalmologist called Professor Olunri. And so Professor Olunri was the first person who saw me. And she was in fact, I still met her recently, about 10 years ago, because I don't live in Nigeria anymore. So 10 years ago is recently to me. So I still met her recently. But she was the first person, but they couldn't really quite work out what the problem with my eyesight was. After my brother was born and at the end of the Civil War, my dad came to Newcastle in the United Kingdom and he spent a year in Newcastle. Those were the days before Jackpot, so he was going back to Nigeria. And I still remember that we went by ship in June at 9 months into his program. And we returned with him. No, sorry, we went by air in June with my mom. And we all came back by ship. This was in 1971 because the course was a 1-year course. But during that time, we saw an ophthalmologist in Newcastle, and even they couldn't work out what was wrong with my eyesight. So they suggested that I should just go to a school and see how things worked. And so I went to a school called Shubola Nursery and Primary School in Ibadan. And the interesting thing about Shubola, which I remember, is that it was run by a British lady called Mrs. Cole, who was married to a Nigerian. And Mrs. Cole's son actually was my junior in my secondary school. And he came up to me and he said, "Do you remember one Mrs. Cole?" And I didn't quite make the connection. I said, "Yes." She taught me, she owned the school that I went to for a year before going to Pacheli. And this boy said, "That's my mother," which was really good to know that even in my secondary school, or like 6-7 years after school, they were still talking about me. But I only spent a year in Shubola. After that, I went to a school for blind people in Lagos, which is the famous Pacheli School for the Blind. So actually, part of the child journey is that I've been a boarder since I was 5 years old, since before my 6th birthday. And a bit of my parenting journey has been that I've only spent 1/4 of every year at home since I was 6 years old. And that's very important because what it means was that my parents missed me and I missed my parents. And maybe in one sense, that's one of the things that makes parenting really important to me, because I understand what it is like to be away from your parents. And I understand it because I was away from my parents. My dad wasn't the kind of person who would, he used to do things that dads did. He would throw me up and down every now and again and play games with me. But I don't think, in the UK, parents always say, "I love you" to their children that much. I don't think my dad was really like that. But there was never any doubt in my mind how much he loved me as a dad. For example, he told me much later on that he wept when I was going to school. I think when I'm stubborn, when I'm feeling angry with him, I go, eh. But well, he did. And now I know that any child who's having to say goodbye to their children, and in a lot of my work these days, I have watched mothers weep and I've watched fathers weep over their children. Love is a really strong emotion that can make men, when they say it's not manly to cry. I've seen love reduce men to tears. I understand what a parenting journey is like also from that perspective. But it wasn't only then. I mean, even my dad, when I was traveling to England for my master's and leaving him, the air hostess said to me, and I hadn't even known that this was happening because my dad actually walked me to the aircraft, which was against all security rules. I don't know, in 1990 that was. He walked me to the aircraft and the air hostess said, "Your dad must really love you." And me, innocently, I said, "Why?" And the air hostess said, "Oh, he had a tear in his eye when he was saying goodbye to you." So love is a really powerful emotion. And in parenting, we must not be afraid to show that. So I went to Pacheli School, and after that, I went to King's College. And again, like I said, my dad wasn't the kind of person who would be like, "Oh, I love you, son, don't go away." But, interestingly, my dad caned me, and I will tell you more about that later on. But even with doing that, I had no doubt of his love. I remember an incident because he would come and visit me in KC, and visiting time was Sunday. But my dad didn't always come on Sundays because he worked in Lagos. He worked in Ibadan, but and he worked as a consultant with federal ministries. And KC was very near the Ministry of Works, Federal Ministry of Works in Lagos. So on a Tuesday afternoon at lunchtime, my dad might come and he would bully his way past the gatesmen. And I would hear this message at lunchtime. And they called us by our surname. Akintunde, go out to the gate. And every time I heard that message, I knew my dad was waiting for me. I also knew that he had broken school rules to do that because we knew school visiting time. And that didn't concern my dad. And when he would come, he would say to me, he would say, oh, I'm going to Lagos. I'm going to Abuja on Wednesday. I'm going to this place on Thursday. I'm going to this place on Friday. And I'll be back in Lagos on Monday. And I'll see you again on Tuesday. I remember one day during the holidays, my mom was like, I was talking to my mom and I said, oh, daddy will be in this place tomorrow. And my mom was like, how do you know? And my dad had carried on the practice of telling me where he was going every day, even during the holidays. I would come home and during the day he would say to me, okay, so tomorrow I'll be in this place and the day after I'll be in this place. And it became a kind of communication, a kind of father-son communication. I'm saying this because you're all invited to his 90th birthday on the 2nd of November. You're all invited. Can make it to Ibadan. Yeah. So we had that kind of way of. I remember when he used to cane me, he would call me like 10 minutes after. I would still be crying, and I am stubborn. Actually, I know that. He would call me and he would say, "You know what you did was wrong," and I'll say it's not wrong, and he would now start arguing with me about how what I did was wrong, and would have this argument after he had finished caning me, in which I would try to justify myself and explain, and he would be telling me that what I did was wrong. But lest you think that it was only my dad, my mom, today is exactly 25 years since she died on the 2nd of September 1998. And what I remember most about my mom was how her maternal instinct worked, but also, strangely enough, how her maternal, I call it maternal exaggeration. And the story that I remember most about maternal exaggeration, it's quite interesting actually. I had malaria, and I was in KC, and I hadn't eaten in the morning. And for some reason that I will never know, after church, my mom came from Ibadan to Lagos, and she actually came to visit me during visiting time. That was the first shock, that I actually had a visitor at visiting time, because I very rarely had visitors at visiting time. And then the next thing was she brought food. Then I said, oh, Mom, I have malaria. I haven't eaten and all that. So I explained to her. So she made me eat. So I ate. The next day, my dad was over. He did not have a meeting. He did not have anything to do in Ministry of Works. He came to me and he brought me out of school. And this is what he said. He said, your mother said I must come and see you because you haven't eaten for 2 days. I said, no, I only did not eat for breakfast and lunch. And when I got home, I started to tell my mom that this is what we call maternal exaggeration. I haven't eaten for 2 days, and you tell my dad you must come and see him because he hasn't eaten. I hadn't eaten for 2 meals, but you must tell my dad that you must come because I haven't eaten for 2 days. And we've always had that joke, but it wasn't the only example of what I call maternal exaggeration. But it's exaggeration that I think comes out of love. So it wasn't that she didn't cane me as well, by the way. In fact, we used to talk about her caning as being more merciless. Yeah. But that was it. That was how I grew up. So eventually I left for England. And I had a lot of time to talk to my dad later on and to ask him a few questions. So one day, I used to talk about my dad teaching me how to ride a bicycle. So I'll tell you the story. So, we used to have this bicycle supports. And, you had these 2 wheels and then you had the supports. Where we lived, we were the only ones that had bicycles, actually. So after a while, my brother said to my dad, I need to be riding the bicycle without supports. So my dad took off the supports and taught him how to ride. Now, I was furious. I was like, how can you teach my younger brother how to ride and you won't teach me? And I would not let my dad rest. I hassled him until he taught me. He took up the supports and he taught a partially sighted person, because I could see a little bit, how to ride a bike. Now, I couldn't ride as fast as all the other people because we lent the bike to all the other people in the estate, and a lot of us used the bike. It wasn't just me and my brother. I could never ride as fast as them. But every time I rode my bicycle, I was proud because my dad taught me how to ride. I was really proud of it because I found out in my secondary school that I had a blind friend of mine who came for half term. And so I taught him how to ride. And he went home and told them that Ife taught him how to ride. And everyone was shocked. And Ife teach you, a blind person, how to ride? And that made me even prouder that my dad had taught me how to ride. Like I said, so I spoke to him about 10 years ago after his 80th birthday when he was here. And we're just talking about, he said he would come back from work and he would watch me because the area around that street was very, there were very few cars there. And he would watch me ride. And he said he used to be filled with trepidation. That what if a car should hit this man? And every day he used to ask himself the question, was I right to have taught this boy how to ride a bike? But he said he never regretted it. But every time I had a scraped knee and I would go to my nurse midwife mother and show her my grazed knee, she would, I told your daddy not to teach you how to ride. I told your daddy not to teach you how to ride. And it was always a thing of fun for me because, sorry about my phone. It was always a thing of great fun for me to show my mom my grazed knee because I knew what she would say. And because I also knew that in her heart, she was actually quite proud that her partially sighted son could ride a bike. I knew that. There was a time I went skiing actually in England. And some people said to me, they said, look, we want you to be an example to people who have gone to schools that, who have been excluded from the school system. So they're going skiing in Scotland. Why don't you go skiing with them? So I went. So I was very proud when my dad came. I was like, let me show my dad my photos of me skiing. So I showed him. My dad was screaming at me. He said, what would your mommy think? You going skiing like that? What would your mommy think? So I was like, okay, fine. I kept quiet. 5 minutes later, he said, let me take one of these photos and take it to your mom and show her. In my mind, I was like, Shebi, you were asking what will your mommy think 5 minutes ago. Which one? But I gave it to him anyway. And so that was the kind of relationship we had. And what it has taught me, I haven't got any children of my own now. But what I have learned is what looking after children, the kind of love that should exist. And strangely enough, I've always loved children. Now, that might be because, I don't know, maybe because they have so much to teach me. And you might think, what would children teach you as an adult? Their innocence is so interesting, but their curiosity, their trust. Now, when I was a teenager, I had a friend. He was 5 years old. His parents had come from America and they were staying with my father during the NYSC. They were staying with my parents. We used to call this guy Professor, and he used to speak with an American accent, of course, because there's only hello, how are you? Type thing. So Professor hung onto me. And I don't know, I haven't seen him in a long time. And so I hope he's not here. He hung on to me in a way that used to embarrass me because I wanted to go with my friends. He would go with me. There was nothing I wanted to do. Professor wouldn't do with me. I'm like, this boy. It was so bad that after his parents left, he actually came for a weekend to stay with me. No, for a week to stay with him, to pick him up the week after. He said he didn't want to go. He stayed an extra week, by which time I was like, late coach. He was only 5 years old. Anyway, but I'll never forget Professor because of something. We used to play a game. And I would say to him, because I never knew colors, I would pick up something, maybe a piece of paper. I'd say, I say to professor, I'd say, what's the color of this thing? Professor will ask me, say, what is the color? So I'll say, it's white. Then professor will say, it's white. Then I'll say, okay, no, it's black. Then professor will say in his American 5-year-old accent, it's black. And one day God like spoke to me about the faith of a child and how a child trusts the adult who tells him this piece of paper is black or this piece of paper is white. And it might have been a game. It might have been a game to us. But in it was something serious, because if I said to professor, it's white, he would repeat after me, it's white. And if I said to professor, it's black, he would say it's black. I didn't know the color, I was just saying it. And so I learned a lot. Children are indeed a gift from God. We always read about Psalm 127, children are a heritage from the Lord, a reward from him. Children are a gift from God. And that's a really interesting thing, because I always look at that and think, what do you do with a gift? What do you do with a gift? Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their enemies in the gate. So you might think the reason why children are given is to honor the man or the woman who has the children. But there's a bit more. What do you do with a gift? The first thing I do if someone gives me a gift is I say thank you. Then the second thing I do is I treasure the gift. Okay. Now, imagine what would happen if someone gave me a gift and I was like, oh, and I just neglected it. Or someone gave me a gift and I just didn't look after it properly. Or someone gave me a gift and I didn't value it. And then the person comes and says, oh, this gift I gave you haven't valued it. What am I saying to the person who gave me the gift? I think sometimes that is why we Nigerians value children. We have a lot of value for children. If you go and look at at our Nigerian proverbs, there was a song when I was growing up that used to go, Omo Lasholaye. It's like something, we really value our children. I have a friend in Lancaster, and I was talking to her one day, and she was telling me about her son and her daughter. And she was so excitedly telling me that the daughter likes sports, but the son doesn't. Oh, no. The daughter likes to draw. The son likes sports. That it's always very boring for the daughter when she's having to take her to the sports event that the son is attending. And she was really so proud of her children. And I just sat down there thinking, she knows these children individually. She knows who they are. She knows what each one likes. She knows how to manage the difference. And I also talked about my 3 children, my brother and my sister, the 3 of us in our family, and how my parents knew our difference. When I went to primary school, I learned to play the piano. When I came home, after 2 years, they bought me a piano as a present. That piano is still at home now, 30, 40 years after. It is out of tune because I don't live in Nigeria anymore. But when I go to Nigeria, I remember that I got it as a birthday present when I was only 8 years old. So they knew the thing that made me who I was. They knew what made my brother who he was. They knew what made my sister who she was. And they knew our difference. And that is how parents are. They know that their children are not the same. And they also know, as Jesus said, that they are not to harm the children that are with them. So these days, a lot of my work is actually bringing children back to their parents after maybe the Department of Social Services has taken them into fostering or into protection. And the reason is that as a Nigerian, I understand that Nigerian parents love their children. They may not demonstrate it in the way that the British cultural system likes, but there is no doubt that they love their children. And so what I'm trying to do when I talk to Nigeria is to make them understand how best to love their children in a way that fits in with this culture. Nigerian parents actually do. Let me tell you a few things I found out. Okay. So the first thing is, let's take caning, for example. I told you before that my dad caned me. But I know for a fact that if I said that in social services, they would say my dad was wicked. They'd say he's cruel. But I explained to you earlier on that my dad didn't just cane me. He talked to me about why he caned me. He explained to me. They would never understand it here. If a child is caned in this country, the child is likely to go to, if they find out, the child is likely to go to fostering. So, and I'm not actually saying that I will cane my children. But really, if you look at Proverbs 13:21, it actually says, he who spares the rod hates his son. But the more important thing is, he who loves him is careful to discipline him. Not just disciplines him, but is careful to discipline him. And I think sometimes, about 20 years ago, when I just come into this country and I was looking for something to watch, I used to watch any program on telly. And some of those talk shows, there was a woman, all these women that have had a hard time. And she was talking about how her children, she doesn't know how to discipline them. And that's why they are getting rowdy and they are doing this. There has to be a certain amount of discipline. I've seen it. I've seen what indiscipline does. I'm working with a family right now, and the child is telling the mother that he smokes pot. If the mother is actually afraid that he will beat her up one day. So you see the two sides of the coin. No, there are. See, when Nigerian children are taken into care, there's also a cultural problem. So they think, oh, okay, you've caned your child, you don't love her, you don't love him. So there's something else. And that is that beating in this country has a cultural connotation. Have you ever heard of the word Dickensian? It actually describes, there's an author in the UK, his name is Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens wrote a book. He wrote many books, and he used to describe cruelty of parents to children. And the cruelty he used to describe, because he was a social commentator, the cruelty he used to describe was of the most awful kind. You can read some of those books of cruelty. So when they talk about Dickensian, they talk about that kind of cruelty. And in some senses, it forms the way that we look at things in this country. The moment you hit a child, you are presumed to be in that kind of situation. But I found that most of the Nigerians who have their children taken away are actually quite educated. Most of the British people whose children are taken away are, to put it mildly, low lives. Honestly, I've seen many. And so when I say that, I say it with a sense of real care as well, because I'm not, again, I have to repeat, I'm not justifying caning. When the children tell their social services, they said, my father beat me yesterday. And the word beat immediately conjures an image. And that image is of real cruelty. So what I say to people is, don't get into that situation. Find other ways of disciplining your children. Find other ways for that reason that you don't know. You will get yourself into a cultural difficulty, not just and that cultural difficulty is very hard to get out of it. Now, there's something else I wanted to tell you. You see, when they talk about beating children here. I've seen a lot of social services reports about our Nigerian parents. They always say that there is no doubt in their minds that the parents love the children. And so I've always been like, why are you then keeping these children away from when you know quite clearly that the parents love the children? Why are you keeping them away? It's never made sense to me until I started to look at the laws. And the laws in this country talk about safeguarding. They talk about children being vulnerable. And so when they look at a child as being vulnerable, and when, as I said, when British people beat their children, they beat them. It's true, actually. They beat them very cruelly. The stories that I've heard, it's really bad. It's really cruel. So when you hear all those kinds of things, then you begin to understand. You begin to understand that they cannot see our culture, and they cannot see it for what it is. And especially, of course, there are also issues around racism. There was about 4 or 5 years ago, a friend of mine, I'll call him a friend now because I worked with him then. There was a bombing in Manchester and his children were in custody. Do you know that the social worker said that this man was the only one who called them and said, what happened? Are our children safe after the bombing in Manchester? The man specifically confessed that no other parent called to ask after their children who were in foster care, which told him, thankfully, that the parents actually cared about their children. So this is what generally tends to happen. One day, a child might just be behaving strangely, and you might never tell why. He might have had a bad day. He might, whatever. And then they would say, oh, what happened? They will start questioning the child. And actually, the questioning is quite ferocious because I know a friend of mine who works with social services, a Nigerian, and she said to me that they've told teachers not to question children because teachers are not qualified to do this. The moment they suspect something, they then call the police and social services. So in many instances, a parent has come to pick up their child, not knowing that they're in trouble. And then what happens is that they keep them for about 3 or 4 hours waiting, and then they tell them, oh, sorry, we have taken your children. And that begins a very long and complicated argument. Court cases, this and that. And what they don't also realize is that they are being watched. So I train people and I say to them, when you are with social services, know that everything you say is being used in evidence against you. And it's quite interesting, the things that they say, because we have loud voices, for example. When we are passionate, you say, why did you take my child? And Oyinbo will say, why did you take my child? In Nigeria will say, why did you take my child? It's the same words. But they would write, the guy spoke in a loud, aggressive tone. And I always tell social services the story of a day when I was at a party with some Nigerians and an Indian girl. So I was talking to this Indian girl, and I said, are you enjoying the party? And she said, yes, I am enjoying the party very much, but I wish these men would stop shouting at each other. So I said to her, actually, they are talking about London traffic. But because their voices were that loud and aggressive, this Indian girl thought that they were about to beat each other up. We are different in many ways, and that difference affects the way that we are looked at. So we need to be really, really careful. It also affects the time. So I had one of my clients once had just come into the country. And when she came in, they said to her, you have just come in, wait till after Christmas and then buy toys during the Christmas sale. So when they took her 3 days or 3 weeks, I think, after they came, I don't know what happened. These people have just come into the country. 3 weeks after they came, they took the children away. And then they now went to their house, because that's what they do. They go to their house. And they wrote in the report, the parents had no toys for the children. And you know that there was nothing that we said We told them, we said, no, you have this, they've just come into the country. But it's a bad mark that they have no choice for their children. So anything you do in that kind of situation, they're watching you, it's just best not to get involved, not to be there. And when that happened, fortunately, the children didn't stay with social services for long because the court threw the case out, because we presented a really good argument that these children had just come into the country, they haven't learned the country's customs and all that kind of things, and that the social services were really not very fair in what they'd done. But it doesn't always happen that way. It's just best not to get involved. Because what happens is when they take the children, you have no say. Anybody can foster your parents. I know of a Christian couple whose children were fostered by two gay women, and there's nothing you can say. I know a Christian couple and I know I once argued with the social services. I said, look, these people want to go to church, and the foster family don't want to take them to church. They were like, what? We don't care. So those kinds of things tend to happen. It's a very difficult, dangerous, murky place. I know a family, a Nigerian family, whose children are autistic, and they were taken by social services. To this day, social services still insist that the parents beat the children, and the parents said they never touched them. And you can tell, because after about 6 or 7 months, the children were moving from one foster family to another. And all the foster families were complaining about what the children did. So eventually, social services were desperate to get the children back to their parents. But this is what I believe. And that's the third thing I believe about our families here. We have an extended family system that they don't have in the UK. And the extended family system works like this. If I do something wrong, and my parents have talked to me, an uncle could get involved, an auntie could. One day, my brother and a friend did something really bad. They took a car and they drove, and they were very much underage. And they actually drove recklessly. I'm so glad that they weren't injured, because their driving would have been bad. When they got out of the car, my dad caned them both. And when he caned my brother's friend, he said to him, he said, if I don't cane you for what you've done, your father will ask me why. So we have an extended family system. They don't have one here. So the government is the extended family. But the problem with government is that the social workers go home at 5 o'clock. I quarreled with my mom once, and one auntie came to me. It wasn't at 5 o'clock when social services went. It was one evening. She came to me. She said, and all she said was, you know your mom loves you. That's all she said. She didn't say more. So we have an extended family system that works. And because they don't have such a thing in the UK, the government is the extended family, but the government cannot be an extended family. So we need to understand, for those who live in the UK, we need to understand the culture we're living in. We need to work within that culture, and we need not to get into trouble. So I have a group of people who run family support courses, and they teach people cultural ways of living in the UK so that you don't get into the kind of trouble that many of my friends have got into. But the problem is, a lot more people need to hear. A lot more people need to know, because I really have no doubt that our Nigerian parents do love our children. I do not doubt it in my mind. And I actually don't think British parents love their children as much. In the UK, when you have reached a certain age, the mother is actually kicking you out to go and find the house of your own. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I know somebody who told me that a 14-year-old child, in those days when there used to be phone bills for phone calls, was paying phone bills, was paying the bills for any calls she makes in the house. You know, so the family structure in this place is quite different. We love our children in a different way. And one of the things I'm really, really focused on is telling people that we can show that love in a way that actually builds the child more tells the child quite clearly how much you love them, how much you care about them, and honors God for giving you the gift of the child. I'm looking at my watch and I'm thinking that maybe for the last 10 or 15 minutes, we could take questions. I know that this was supposed to be about my own journey in parenting, but since I don't have any children and I've worked with a lot of children, I thought that sharing those experiences might be a useful part of the conversation we have. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'll take them now.
Thank you, Dr. Ifeolu. Do we have some questions for him? We could raise our hands electronically if we have some questions for Dr. Ifeolu. Or do we have any comments? AKD Sachs, thank you. You can unmute yourself and speak. We are listening. You can speak.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate my daddy that is talking this evening. I really learned a lot and I enjoyed the meeting. In fact, my question is that how could we divine the kind of love of a parent that don't take the responsibility on his child in area of let me say in area of looking after him, know how where he is, maybe he's still existing or not. How could we divine that kind of love?
Well, that is not love, actually. Like I said, I believe that Nigerians love their children a lot, but those are generalizations. You can say that as a generalization. I know that there are many Nigerian parents who do not show that kind of love, and I recognize that in what I say. Like I said, a child is a gift. You don't have a child if you don't want to have the responsibility of looking after the child. You don't have the child. Some people, however, there are issues around it as well. We have to be very careful. You see, a lot of people don't say what they feel. Some people, but not all, cannot look after their children. And you know what tends to happen? Instead of admitting that they cannot, they now start getting angry or getting fierce or getting whatever. You know, that does happen because a lot of times, a lot of our action is based on what we want to say, and a lot is based on what we cannot say, or what we are afraid to say, or what we just feel would embarrass us if we say. So part of what we have to do is to find out why something has happened. When we find out why it has happened, we can conclude whether the parent actually loves the child, whether the parent actually knew about the responsibilities of having a child. Many mothers have said to me that before they had their own children, they just used to look at children anyhow. But then when they had their own, a kind of natural love that that they never knew they had. Do you understand? Came out. And I know a girl who says that she doesn't want to have children because she doesn't want to put a child through what she went through. So there are many, many reasons why people do things. And I'm not saying that there are some people who, I know that there are some people who don't care. But honestly, the first thing I would do is not to presume that they don't care, is to ask why they haven't done their duty and to explore. The more you explore deeply, I know many people who would say, my father didn't care, my father didn't love me. And they may be right. But when you investigate from their father would say, but you know what happened was that when I had this child, I didn't have the resources, but how can I go and be asking people for money for this and that? Or they might say, when I had this child, there was something, or there was something, or there was something. And then you begin to say that there's another perspective to it. The result is the same. And the result is not good for the child in question, because as I said, part of what we must remember is that children are vulnerable. and children are trusting. If a child knows you as the father and you don't perform your duty as the father, the result will be disappointment. And that disappointment, you see, one of the things that doctors will tell you is that children, they learn so much in the first 3 or 4 years of their lives. And a lot of that learning is subconscious. You cannot say what brought this knowledge to you. So the important thing is, if you're not able to look after a child, unfortunately, don't do it because of the effect of your bad care on the child in question.
Thank you. There's another hand up. Olanike Eniton. You can ask your question. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm glad I was able to make it to today's program. And I could say that this is me. I left Nigeria just a couple of weeks ago. And then coming here, I'm going to ask my question. Something happened that made me able to relate to what you were saying. My host here has 2 children. And then she was telling me the story of how the first one was nearly taken out of her hand at the age of less than 2 years because she took the girl to school. And then one day they just called her that her child was taken to the hospital with an ambulance. And then nothing was wrong with the child in the morning. And by the time she got there, she saw 7 doctors surrounding the child. And she became afraid. What happened? For kind of like there was just a bat mark at the back of the girl. I decided to ask her, what did you do to her? What happened to her? This is a bat mark that was not how can I be flogging a 2-year-old child? And it was a serious case. They put a criminal record on her TRP, social worker, and then it's actually got a bit messy until she sued them. So she sued them, he wrote letter against them, and they have to start begging her at the end of the day that they wanted to compensate her. Now, my question is, how do you, in this kind of environment, how do you then discipline your child? I took her children out to playground a couple of weeks ago, and then this little child poured sand on her head, and I was angry. I wanted to flog her. And then I saw the white people, and I said, she don't want to send me back home. So I just said, everybody, go inside. We're not playing again. Don't let me. Because I was annoyed. And then they do things that make me so angry, and I was like, one day I said, I feel like taking you back to Nigeria, flogging you, and then bringing you back here after I finish flogging you. So in this kind of environment, how do you still discipline your child? Children need discipline. So being here, how do you still find a way to correct your child and then discipline your child with love without getting into trouble?
First, let me ask you just one question. Which country are you in?
Estonia, Europe.
Yeah, in Estonia. Oh, okay. I don't know very much about Estonian culture, except a few things. So, the first thing I need to say is, white people don't know that much about Black people. There are very few Black doctors in Estonia, I can imagine. Right. So
yeah, very few. If there are something.
So they cannot. It's harder for them to know the difference between a birthmark and a mark caused by caning. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, I do.
That creates a problem. And even here, where there are many Blacks, sometimes I find that a lot of Blacks have questioned the knowledge of white people about Black diseases and about Black activities and about Black marks and stuff like that. I don't know if our doctors here would correct me on that, but I have heard some observations that there is less knowledge about Black skin, Black illnesses than about white illnesses. So those kinds of things may even happen here. I don't know. But it's more likely to happen in a place like Estonia, where there's less contact with Black people than here. But in this country, there are in the courses I've been through, what they are recommending is things like depriving them of television, showing them that their actions have consequences in one way or another, depriving them of games, whatever. making them face the wall or something. It is the touching them that's the problem. It can be called assault. And the other thing is, actually, I know parents who have gone to prison for hitting their children. The first thing that happened was that they knew they were in trouble, so they denied it, which made things worse. And I was telling them like that. I was telling them, tell the truth. Tell the truth. But they never told me even that they had hit their children until the pressure was too much. Then they told me. I was like, why didn't you tell me in the beginning? But it was too late. They actually went to prison for a year. So it's the hitting that's the problem. I know another parent, and I was very unhappy with the judge and the social services who wrote the letter to the children, because they admitted that they had hit the children. But they hadn't even really hit the children. What they said was, like, if their child is going to cross the traffic light, they might physically restrain them or something. The court took it as physical hitting. The judge now wrote it to the children and said, your parents have been very cowardly. They have, and I was like, how can you tell children that their parents have been cowardly? What you are doing is you are undermining the family, something like that. So there are so much, the Department of Social Services here that looks after children is actually called the Department of Children's Service. And I keep thinking, a family does not comprise only of the children. The parents are in the family. So if you have a Department of Children's Services and you're saying the children come first, you're not looking at parenting. You're not looking at how to train the parents on how to do how to do the work of being parents, which is why, as I said to you, some parents were actually saying on television, we don't know how to parent. So you have to think of ingenious ways of doing it, like saying, okay, whatever you are going to get today, you're not getting anymore. Or I will do this, or I will take your video away, or I will do something. Or just say, when you do something, it will have consequences, and make the consequences linked to the act. So long as you can avoid the caning or the beating, you should be fine.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one hand up, and I think we will take that as the last hand before your final comments. Dr. Suko Anjorin, let's hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. This has been very educative, and the fact that you even kind of layered everything on your own life, and there's so much lesson that we can draw from all the things you talked about. Thank you so very much. My question is something you mentioned like a lot of times when you were talking. It's about, even though my dad did not verbally tell me I love you, and maybe because of culture, but you believed it in your heart by the things he did and all of that. In your practice and also in your experience of life, is there any advice or the way you can help parents listening to us here and those who may listen later to find how the appropriate way to communicate in the language that a child will understand, even if you are not going to be verbal, even though I know that cannot be overemphasized. It's important. We should learn to say it. I know definitely it's not in our culture to say that all of the time. But if you want to really have a good home, especially with your wife, women would like to hear that all of the time. But for children, are there like love language that a child will understand that may not be verbal, but would communicate it effectively, and so that a child can grow with that you could help us with in just. I hope my question is clear.
Yes. When my mom died, my dad changed a lot. It was then that I saw that my dad could really cry. And I've seen him cry a lot more times when my mom died than before. I think he really felt he had to be the head of the whole. And I can proudly say that I was the only one that brought him to tears before my mom died. But that's a different question. Like I said, he didn't have to tell me. And again, actions always speak louder than words. But my niece, my sister's daughter, stayed with my dad a lot. And she used to come and visit me every year. And we used to have arguments. And I remember I used to say to her then that all these arguments you are arguing with me, I've argued them with your grandpa before. So don't try these tricks on me. But my niece used to tell me that she loved me every time. I love you, uncle. And that's how I found out that my dad had been telling her, because she grew up with my dad. So parents can say to their children how much they love them and make their children understand that love is a wonderful thing. But like I said, actions speak louder than words. You see, a child would know that the parent loves them. I promise you. And it's not just me that can say that. A child would know that the parent loves them. Even if the child doesn't hear it all the time. I know about husbands and wives, it's actually quite important, because then the wife is older. The wife actually has expectations that children don't have. Parents create the expectation in their children. Because like I said, children learn in subtle ways. They learn in subconscious ways. They learn love by what they see. And that's why we always talk about giving an example to your children. If you teach your children something, it'll come out. So the first time my niece said, "Uncle, I love you," I was in shock. I have now grown to accept it more, and I actually now tell her how much I love her too, which I suppose is something that you learn. But I see the importance of saying that as well. But as I say, a child will know that the parent loves them. What the child sees in the home, if the child sees love in the home between father and mother, between father and child. As I said, my dad's love for me was not affected by the fact that he caned me, because I knew, because of the other things that made me know that he loved me. Because love is a very, is not a one-sided thing. You love through all circumstances. You know, much later on, my dad told me one day, he said, he said one day he and his wife, my mom, they had this conversation that, you know, because I'm a very stubborn person. If you come to my house right now, there's a broken glass that they said that they want to show to my children because I threw a stone at it and broke it. So they were asking, they were having, I call it the parent summit. They were like, have we been too gentle with this guy? Are we too nice, too soft with him because he's never at home all the time and he only comes home for a quarter of the year? Should we punish him more? And my dad told me this and I was like laughing, but then I was old enough to appreciate what he was saying. The concern about discipline and love is very important. And it's really important for parents to understand where the line is. Because if you love a child too much to discipline them, then you don't love them at all. Because that's what that Proverbs chapter 21 says. He who loves his child is careful to discipline. Careful. It says, tell someone the truth in love. So love is an expression much more than words. And the truth is they will know by what they see. But it's also good to tell them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ifeolu Akintunde. Are you going to give us your final words in summary?
In summary, all I'm just really going to say is that we should really value our children. They are also different, no matter who they are. But there's one thing that brings them together. They're all God has given each child as a gift to the parent. So when we value them and love them, that's our way of saying, thank you, Lord, for the wonderful gift of this child that you've given to me. The second thing I really want to say is that the greatest gift we can give our child is love. But don't forget that God is love. So when we love our children, we are showing them God. Because the most important legacy we leave for them is where they go when we have gone. And so that's why it says, train a child in the way that it should go, and when it grows up, he will not depart from it. It has to be a deliberate, conscious effort to show them that you love them and that they must love God. A friend of mine and his wife came to church on Thursdays for the worship group, and they have only one child. This child was a miraculous child, in fact, because they didn't know that they prayed and prayed and prayed, and the child came as an act of faith after several years of marriage. And so they said, Hannah gave her life to Jesus during the weekend conference. They had a weekend conference in Cardiff while we were having our conference in Birmingham. So they were like, Hannah gave her life to Jesus during the weekend conference. And they were talking so excitedly about it. Like, this is our life's mission. We have achieved it. Do you understand what I mean? We have performed our duty. We have trained our child in the way that he should go. And now, when she grows up, she will not depart from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ifeolu. God bless you. For my doctor was asking about the love languages. I'm sure we can check out the 5 love languages and see how they apply to children and apply them in our own lives, and we'll find it quite useful. Thank you, everybody, for coming for today's program. It has been insightful. I think one of my takeaways is that we create the expectation in our children of what love is and of what that care is. Thank you so much for blessing us, Dr. Ifeolu, and thank you everyone for being here. So just end with our final words for the parenting group, and that is, I repeat after me, I, and the children God has given me, we are for signs and wonders.
For signs and wonders.
Amen. God bless you all. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.